Okay, welcome everybody to Wall Street Reporter's next Super Stock live stream, February 3rd. Of course, this is the show where we bring you those stocks which have that massive upside potential. Companies going after, multi-billion-dollar market opportunities that are at a key inflection point and with multiple catalysts in place, which can ignite an increase in shareholder value. And of course, in the last 18 months, we've had some major winners. We've had, I think, 9 stocks. We might be up to 10. 9 stocks. Excuse me, 9 stocks that have increased between 1,100% and 5,000%. And we're looking for that next big winner. And of course, we've had too many doubles and triples to count. So with that said, Dan, welcome to the program.
Hi, how you doing? Good to be here again.
All right, Dan, you had some very impressive news, which in the last couple of days, but the Cepharanthine for prostate, you're building out the pipeline strategy for Cepharanthine. So, there's a lot of things that are starting to really, to me, it gives me the sense of Pharmadrug really has a lot in common with some of the previous stocks we've had on, which have had some of those massive increases in valuation. Look, of course, life sciences, healthcare, biotech, high risk, high reward. So there's a long path. There's obviously a long path between where you are now and let's say to FDA drug approval, if and when that happens. But in the meanwhile, we've seen so many stocks. I mean, generally speaking, in this kind of like early stage drug discovery, there's been some tremendous increases in valuation. Of course, volatility as well to the downside. As companies, they go through the drug discovery process and either it gets de-risked or the FDA comes back, but it makes it let's just say this makes it very exciting for investors to watch stocks like Pharmadrug. So you've begun the journey.
Yes, we have indeed. So yeah, we have a lot going on today. I think we should focus on specifically Cepharanthine and within Cepharanthine, specifically Cepharanthine and cancer, because we also have an antiviral side, which we'll probably do on another live stream.
Dan, let's do this. Let's focus today because you have a couple of different aspects of the company. Let's focus on Cepharanthine and how the applications as a treatment for cancer. I think we should start with the current news announcement, which is you filed a provisional patent in the U.S. For Cepharanthine as a treatment for prostate cancer. Can you kind of walk us through the release? Like, what does this mean for the company?
Yeah, most definitely. So, to step back a little bit, I know you're asking me about that, and I will talk about that. But to step back a little bit, we're looking to develop Cepharanthine, our version of Cepharanthine, because Cepharantine's been in Japan for 70 years, but we have a much more potent. The bioavailability of our Cepharanthine is 10 times, according to the studies, more powerful or more bioavailable than the one that's been in Japan for 70 years. And with that, it's much easier to be able to use it for cancers. And so we already have orphan drug designation from the FDA. This was received on our version of Cepharanthine to be used for esophageal cancer. Now, we have a laundry list of tests to do before we begin a clinical trial, and we've already begun discussions with the FDA about beginning a clinical trial with Cepharanthine. And so we stepped back on the cancer side, and we basically said, okay, let's widen out the profile here in terms of what cancers we can go after. We did a 60-cell line study, and then we followed it by a 20-cell line study. In the first one, the most powerful versus cancer in the dish was Cepharanthine used on esophageal cancer by a long shot. The second study added a different element. There were less cancers. There were 23 instead of 60. But what we did was that we didn't just look at Cepharanthine versus cancer and the standard of care, which is chemo versus cancer. We all did a third column, which was combining the Cepharanthine with the chemo.
Okay, the combination therapy.
that we found that not only we already knew prostate had some good results, not as good as esophageal, but we knew they had good results. But when we combined it with chemo, the standard of care, specifically we used cabazitaxel, we found a synergistic response, meaning that it was greater than using either of them by themselves. So the prostate by itself was already quite powerful in the dish, but when we combined it with chemo, it was even more powerful. So that's what we filed a provisional patent for, is the concept that we can use cepharanthine combined with chemo to treat prostate, potentially treat prostate cancer. We don't need to do that for esophageal cancer because we already have protection from the FDA with our orphan drug designation.
Okay.
So this basically adds a second column,
Okay.
a second cancer for us to pursue a clinical trial with cepharanthine with the FDA.
Okay. So really, I mean, okay. So this is from the first time you appeared, we talked about that I guess the goal is having cepharanthine kind of as a platform drug, as a platform drug for the treatment of cancers, other indications. There's also antiviral potential. So it's really a very powerful, powerful tool. And I think now, okay. So now I noticed in the release now you are you're calling it PD001. So this is the official drug.
That's the term. That's the name we've come up with for our version of cepharanthine, which is that it's an enteric-coated version, which means that it's reformulated so that the bioavailability goes from 6% to a much higher bioavailability. Tests have studies. The people that developed it saw that it was about 70 to 80% bioavailable versus the normal pill, which is only 6%. So that's a much, and this was shown in many scientific studies. So our version of cepharanthine, we have the exclusive rights to that patent, to that version of the drug, and we're calling that PD Pharmadrug 001.
Okay, so this is okay. So I tell you, for the investment story is really starting to kind of come together here. I mean, the market cap of the company is still only 15 million Canadian, not even US. And you're building out this pipeline, which potentially could be very, very valuable, especially as you advance in clinical trials. As that happens, the product gets de-risked. Obviously, there are catalysts that can have major increases in valuation. We've had, I mean, some of our biggest winners have been companies, not too dissimilar. Cytodyne, that was a stock that went from 50 cents to $10 as their drug pipeline got de-risked. They went towards FDA approval and all that. So let's so in terms of cepharanthine for prostate cancer, in the release I saw basically I made some notes here. So so there was basically a 5% improvement over the combination with cepharanthine gave a 5% improvement versus just the cabazitaxel, which is I guess the chemo alone.
It's a chemo, yeah. It's a standard of care. It's one of the chemos being used.
Okay, is that? I mean, okay. So I'm not a physician, but is that compelling enough? A 5% is a 5% improvement. Is that compelling enough to be commercially viable?
I personally think so. Now look, this is science, and we got to do some more tests before we get into the clinic. Clinic being that we start using it on human patients. But I think it's substantial. But there's more story here that we actually haven't talked about.
Because as I just realized, I mean, like, listen, if you ask anybody, hey, do you want to have a 99% chance of survival or 95% chance of survival? People will go with 99%. Then the question is, will the insurance companies agree to it? Will they say, hey, we'll reimburse whatever if it gives you only a 5% increase?
Well, look, you have to understand that this was studied in a dish, right? Now we got to study. Now we're doing the studies in the animals, which is going to get us more of an understanding of why, right? So now we got that. Okay, we saw that there's that relationship. Now we got to explain that relationship better before we go ahead. And explaining it is what can actually make it far more impressive. And so let me explain that for a second. When we're looking at cepharanthine and cancer, right? When you look at any drug or cancer, there are several different ways you can go about treating the cancer. You can stop the spread. you can kill the cancer cell itself, or you can help another drug work better. And one of the major problems that some cancers have with chemo is that the chemo works, but then it stops working because the cancerous tumor starts to get smart with the chemo and starts to resist the chemo. And so that's an element here that I really want to talk about, which is what could be the game changer here. Is that cepharanthine may, and we've seen it in third-party studies, not studies done by us, but studies done by others, notable academics and scientists, and now we just have to do it ourselves to show it ourselves, is that cepharanthine shows the potential to reduce the chemo resistance. And so that's what becomes very interesting. Now, in this study with prostate cancer, we saw that they worked better together, but that's even before the chemo resistance was actually developed. So we may actually see that combination go even higher once we actually do a longer test in animals that show the chemo resistance starting. So the chemo going up, then the chemo going down. Oh, but then the cepharanthine brings the chemo back up. And so that just requires a longer testing. So far on the prostate side, we saw the additive or synergistic performance immediately. But as we lengthen out, we may find that it's even much higher in terms of the combination effect. And again, this is not something that we're hoping for. This is something that has been shown in third-party academic and scientific studies. We just need to do it ourselves. But this is not a concept we developed. This actually exists. But we just needed a much stronger cepharanthine to be able to do it, and we have that.
Okay,
so that's potentially the game changer here, right?
Okay, so I think the key point though is that in a certain way, this has been de-risked in a sense in terms of that cepharanthine has 70-year history of use, obviously at a lower concentrations where I think you said 6% versus much higher concentrations what you're doing. So that,
but I do want to point out, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you here. Although with the history in Japan and the Japanese authorities have all the data on any adverse effects that have happened with people in cepharanthine, with the scientific data available, we already know the maximum amounts of cepharanthine you can have in your body, and it's still safe.
Okay.
You see what I mean? So despite the fact that ours is more powerful, it's more powerful because it takes a little bit more time to go into the system, and therefore it lets more of it be absorbed. But that doesn't mean that we don't know what level of cepharanthine in general can get into the body and it still be safe. And all of our studies are based on that known level of cepharanthine that is safe. So we have some very, very good data in terms of understanding the safety of cepharanthine.
Okay.
We just need to go through the regular off-the-shelf tests to show that our pill is the same, but we already know through third-party studies. So
we got some audience comments, questions coming in, so we'll get to those. Actually, I just want to address one. So I don't know if this guy's making a joke or he's serious, but just to confirm, this is not a cure for cancer yet. This is early stage drug development, and potentially it could be a potential therapy, but this is quite a ways off.
Yeah, cancer is not cancer. Some cancers already have therapies that are quite successful. Not all cancers are death sentences, right? Some cancers need better therapies, and so we're working on improving therapies for cancers that need more improvement in their therapies.
And there's actually so just if people are not familiar with I guess the medicine, but most of these therapies, whether it's for cancer or other diseases, there's usually combination therapies, right? There might be one drug, but then somebody comes up with another drug, and the second drug actually improves the treatment or takes away. There's always various combinations which have different benefits, and that actually is a whole multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to determine here, right? That's a lot of the reason why we're doing all these tests is we're still determining what's the way in which we're going to go and attempt to start the clinical trial. Now, we had said last time we had several potentials for clinical trials. we got 3 of them we're working on with cepharanthine, and 1 or 2 potentially on the DMT side, which we can talk another time. But we've already started the dialogue with the FDA on cepharanthine. We've had a pre-IND meeting, and they looked at our cepharanthine, and they're like, okay, we get it. Well, these are the tests that I know that it's in Japan, but these are the tests you need to do to your cepharanthine in order to be able to put it into a human. That's why we've started, we press released that a couple of weeks ago. We've started the pharmaceutical grade manufacturing process of that cepharanthine to do the off-the-shelf tests to be able to, fulfill what the FDA wanted before we put it into humans. And we'll talk about the antiviral side another time. And now on the cancer side, we've already had orphan drug designation from the FDA for esophageal cancer. And now we're revealing the data showing us that we should be going after prostate as well. So now we're doing animal tests in both cancers, the esophageal and the prostate. And what we really want to determine here again is, do we want to go into or pursue a clinical trial where cepharanthine is used specifically as a monotherapy, as the drug to potentially treat cancer? Or do we want to use it in combination with the current chemo, because we think that it has a synergistic effect and that it reduces the resistance to chemo? Okay. So we're seeing 2 different avenues to be able to use. Right. We want to figure out what's the best one, right?
Okay. Now here's the question. Now so you're going after the esophageal cancer, prostate. What other what other cancers do you have other cancers that are in the pipeline that you might be looking at, or what makes you choose like which kind of indication are you what's kind of the process for deciding which indications to go after?
So, the first one, which was obvious, was esophageal. And the reason why, let's talk about esophageal a bit here. You need to look at a couple of things here. You need to look at what cancer the drug is most effective for, but then you also need to see what cancer needs a drug, right? Because I might find that, for a certain type of cancer that, cepharanthine is extremely effective potentially, but they already have that, the life expectancy has already gone up tremendously for that type of cancer. Esophageal is a really bad cancer from the standpoint that it's growing rapidly, and that it's got a very, very high death rate within the first 5 years. So esophageal cancer really does need some new therapies. And so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to go after esophageal cancer. But the other reason was that just by itself, it seemed to be that cepharanthine was most potent in a dish, right? So this is early, but most potent on esophageal cancer. Now, when we went to the FDA, before we did that test and we said we want orphan drug designation on our cepharanthine with esophageal cancer, there was already enough other studies done by others that showed that potential with esophageal cancer that they granted it to us. So we're not the only ones to have done tests that show that potential. So that's why we chose esophageal cancer. And then once we got orphan drug designation, it's like, that's a no-brainer, because then you get a quicker, faster, cheaper, path through the FDA with orphan drug designation, and you get a protection, on the market afterwards. So that's why we chose esophageal. But then when we did all of the other cancers, we found that, again, in the dish, that the combination with prostate was quite good. And so that's why we chose that. Are there other cancers that showed promise? Yeah, we did 60, and we found that 20 were highly effective. And then when we did the 20, we found about 5 that had showed that combination. But we can't do everything. So
okay. So Dan,
the 2 best are esophageal cancer and prostate.
Let's get to some audience questions. Okay. Ken is asking, is your cepharanthine drug delivered by IV?
No. So that's the major thing that needs to be understood here. The only way in the past to get that high bioavailability was to actually administer it through IV, right? Which is not, like if you're going to do chemo once a week and then suddenly you have to show up every day for an IV on cepharanthine, which would be that kind of frequency, it didn't work. And so what's exceptional, I think, in terms of the potential of our version of cepharanthine is that it's in a pill. It's a pipeline of cancers to be treated with a pill. And so that's what it is. It's an oral administration. It's a pill.
Okay, so essentially, the pipeline that Pharmadrug is developing, as the potential treatments, they're all pill based. It's not IV. All the stuff right is going to be pill form.
That's the key. That's what we have. We have a pill version of cepharanthine that has an effectiveness that's quite close to IV versus the regular pill in Japan, which is more than 90% weaker than doing it through IV. So that's what's potentially the game changer here.
Okay, so Ken is asking, are you in any preliminary discussions with chemo pharma companies for combination use with chemo and cepharanthine?
No, that's not necessarily required. First, again, we have to decide whether we're going to be going with chemo as a combination or whether we're going to do it alone. Once we've decided that, we already have a prominent doctor who focuses on esophageal cancer, who said that if we're going to go down the route of using it with chemo, that we would work with her and look to team up with chemo providers.
Okay. Mr. Pickles, what a great name. Are you? Can you elaborate on the upcoming partnership you've mentioned?
Yeah, I can't really, but the point is that I just meant that we're working on the on some testing on the antiviral side, and we're working with an institution. But when we have results, we'll talk about it. We should have results sometime in February.
Okay. A couple of questions. Are you working with Health Canada?
Not yet. We probably will at some point. We're not yet. We have not initiated discussions with Health Canada. But we're looking at other institutions in Canada to potentially work with.
Okay. Ken, are you using a patented chelation process with this pill form?
I mean, for that, we would have to talk to Paul in terms about the process and in terms of how we get the high bioavailability. But that process is patented. Whatever it is, not only is it patented, but we've already shown everything to the FDA, and the FDA was pretty, like, for where we're at. They thought the work was really good. They just said, again, this looks really good. You seem to have buttoned up everything for where you're at. These are the list of tests, off-the-shelf tests that we want you to do before we're happy to put that pill. So, but the engineering for that pill is done, and that needs to be understood, because a lot of times people have molecules and they seem to be effective, and then it's turning that molecule into a pharmaceutical pill that becomes a big issue. That part's done. We already have a pill.
Okay. A couple of people asking, when will you and the director start to buy in the open market?
It's very difficult to answer that. When you're management or director of a public company, you're in blackout almost all the time, and it's very difficult. So in between reporting seasons, you're not after the quarter or the year's ended and you haven't filed yet, you're not allowed to trade in the stock. If I'm sitting on information and I haven't released it yet, so I would say that a good 70 to 80% of the time we're actually blacked out from the market. So it's not that easy. Plus, to be honest, I mean, I own a lot of stock that I bought with my own money.
Okay. Let's see. Any other questions? Okay, so let's get back to. Okay, so Dan, what's the? Okay, so right now you're going after 2 indications, very early stage, preclinical. What do you have coming up? What milestones in the catalysts are there? Upside catalysts, which are coming up that investors should pay attention to?
For everything, or for cepharanthine and cancer specifically?
Actually, you know what? Let's talk about let's talk about everything that you have right now, because you have a couple. It's not just cepharanthine. You have a pretty robust pipeline that you're developing here.
Yeah. So let's close off this cepharanthine and cancer right now. So we've announced 2 things previously. Number one, in the past 2 weeks, I mean. Number one, that we've started the process to produce a pharmaceutical grade a pharmaceutical grade batch of our cepharanthine, the PD001, to be able to do those off-the-shelf tests and to have it ready to get the seal of approval from the FDA saying, okay, this pill can go into humans, which will be an IND process. So we've started that. and just milestones as we get that going will be released. In the shorter term, we're into an animal study here for cepharanthine for both those cancers I talked about. So in March, we should be getting results on prostate cancer and esophageal cancer, and that will give us more insight in the ability to treat the chemo resistance as well. It'll give us much more insight on that. So that should be coming in March. But that's for cepharanthine and cancers. In terms of the month of February, we have a few things going on. We're working on the antiviral side, and we'll talk about it when we have stuff to talk about. But we're working on it right now. And DMT is hard at work right now. We were very busy throughout the month of January to get the DMT glaucoma process started. We've added another molecule. We talked about that a bit last time, but in the next couple of weeks, we'll be seeing results from DMT, our program, which is to treat glaucoma with an alternative or reformulation of DMT with a delivery device that you can put in the eye that has a slow release. So in the next couple of weeks, we should get the first batch of results on the 3 different formulations.
Okay.
And we'll help us choose which one we ultimately want to use. Then we're going to get a second batch later. And then at some point, we're going to say, okay, this is the formulation we want. And then we start producing the prototype and start doing the animal tests so that we can get ready to eventually go to the FDA for a clinical trial.
Okay. This is DMT as a treatment for glaucoma. We talk about it. Yeah. How did this come about? Because again, people they're familiar with DMT as psychedelic, but how is it used in glaucoma?
So there was a program already. So there's a lot of literature out there, meaning there's been a lot of scientific studies done on the ability of glaucoma to be treated by DMT. We know specifically how, and that's because there is this serotonin. There are 2 serotonin receptors that respond to DMT, and both of those receptors are present in the eye. And the DMT can reduce, through that receptor, can reduce the inflammation in the eye. That's the problem that glaucoma creates that causes blindness. It reduces the interocular pressure. And so we already know there was one pharmaceutical company that started that process in the 90s. They ended up stopping because their route was an oral pill. And, when you ingest DMT through an oral pill, you can cause other issues in terms of safety. So we figured, our chief science officer, who's quite intelligent on this, did a lot of research and realized, well, instead of ingesting it orally, why don't we just apply it directly? And then it also solves the problem of people not putting the drops in all the time, because if you have a delivery mechanism that can do it on a consistent, controlled manner, then you can solve 2 problems. A, having something that's more effective, having the DMT not have to go through the oral ingestion, which causes issues. And you can solve the problem of making sure that the drops get continuously dropped into the eye. So we already know that DMT works with those receptors in the eye. So now it's just a question of what's the best formulation. And so we narrowed it down to 2. We ended up wanting to add a 3rd. And so that's why we've had a little bit of a delay here. We're doing all 3 back again together, and we should have results soon. And that will show us what the best one is. Not if there's potential, but which one has the best potential.
Okay, so there's a bunch of upside catalysts in place right now for the stock, the company. Dan, so between like the DMT for glaucoma, between cepharanthine, I don't know if this is a fair question to even ask you, but which of these milestones do you think can have the most upside impact, on valuation if once you get there?
It's very hard because the market.
Which one are you most excited about? I'm not going to ask you about which potential milestone do you think investors should kind of pay special attention to?
So I love all of these, but I'm going to answer you. I'm not going to evade the question.
Which of your children do you like the best?
Which of my children do I love best, right? So, so we got 3 avenues for cepharanthine. namely that we got cepharanthine for cancer, and on the cancer side, we're going after 2 different cancers, but our main candidate is esophageal cancer. So let's be clear about that. That hasn't changed. That's the main one we're going to be pushing first. So I would have to say on the cancer side, our favorite is still esophageal cancer, right? For several reasons that I've already mentioned. And then there's potential to use cepharanthine as an antiviral, right? And so it's not just COVID. It could be for SARS. It could be for all types of infectious diseases of that sort, you know. And so we're doing a lot of work on that right now. So I like that as well. I do prefer the cancer over the antiviral. I do, but both are exciting. But if I had to pick one, I would choose that. And then there's the DMT. We're actually doing 2 things on the DMT. We're also working with Johns Hopkins University, but we'll talk about that at a later time. And so we have a clinical trial potentially coming on that side. But I do think that what we're doing on the DMT side is extremely unique and is going after a need that is not met, which is a proper way to treat glaucoma. There are therapies out there, but people go blind all the time from glaucoma. So there is no complete cure to it. So to add another therapy that could be more effective, from a new drug being used, and also a delivery mechanism, I think is extremely exciting. So I love them all. My number 1 would be esophageal cancer and cepharanthine. Then after that, I would say cepharanthine as an antiviral, meaning that I love cepharanthine. I absolutely love cepharanthine. I think it is a game changer. I think it's potentially a real platform drug here. But yeah, we are still excited about DMT, and I think that's going to be revealed more over the next couple of months.
Okay, let's see if we can get to a few questions before we wrap up. Question here. Okay, so what can we? I guess the question is, what other FDA? I think the question is like, what other FDA news can we see from the company in coming months?
I mean, I know people want an answer to this. It's very difficult because, you know, there are so many steps, right? And so does it take 9 months? Does it take a year? Does it take 6 months? Like, I don't know exactly. But what I do know is that we were given a task list. So I can't tell you number of months, but I can tell you we know what we need to do. We were given the path. We went to them, we presented to them, and they came back with the path. Like, this is what we need you to do. So we're moving towards it.
Okay, Dan, interesting question here. Have you considered using a vape to deliver cepharanthine regarding as an antiviral? Possible CBD combination?
No, is the quick answer. We haven't. We're very, we love the cepharanthine in a pill. So we're going down that road. CBD, I mean, I like CBD in terms of its therapeutic potential, but it's just not, it would just be a fishing expedition. And I think we're beyond that. I don't think we're looking for fishing expeditions. We're not looking for something that, hey, that might work. We're actually looking to prove out what we believe has already been shown by other academic studies. So we see ourselves more as development as opposed to research.
Okay.
Development. I mean, research, which is not what we're looking for.
Okay, what about veterinary applications? You know, cepharanthine for animal use. I mean, actually, Ken is making a good point. People do spend a lot of money on their pets and animals. Is that a
look? The truth is, it's not something we've considered. Is it something that we would consider? Yeah, but you know, you got to do one step at a time. First,
right. You can only focus on so many things.
First, let's get into a clinical trial with the FDA for cepharanthine to treat cancer and potentially an antiviral as well. And then let's talk about, you know, do we focus on animals as well?
Okay.
We have to focus, right?
Okay, excellent. Dan, on that note, I want to thank you, and we'll look forward to getting an update in the coming weeks with more exciting news on cepharanthine, DMT, and other things.
Thank you. Great to be on.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining our live stream. We'll see you on the next one.